a lesson that's a unique one, I think, here for our series. What is significant about the Sabbath day? What is significant about the Sabbath day? First off, tell me what it is. It's a day of rest, okay? What day is it officially in the Bible, at least in the Old Testament? What? The Saturday, right? 6 days the Lord made the heaven, the earth, the sea, and all that in them is, and rested the seventh day being the Saturday that we would call Saturday today. Okay? And we're going to do a lesson where Jesus deals with the topic of the Sabbath, and he deals with it several times, specifically to Jewish people and how they were treating it. Okay? Now, where we're going to pick up here today is going to be in John 5, so be ready there. But we are now already 1 year in to Jesus' life at this point, or Jesus' life, Jesus' ministry. 1 year into the ministry that he does. How many years did we kind of work through to show that? About little over 3.5 years, okay? His ministry goes, and we did some things to kind of show you how you can see that in the Bible. What is guessed. And we base that off of, particularly where we're going to pick up today, out of John chapter number 5. We base it off of the 4 times you see mentioned Passover. 3 times you see it actually officially mentioned. The John 5 passage, it just says a feast, but there's a lot of details that give us indication that most likely it's either Passover or tabernacle, okay? So, and they're both close to each other at that time, so we know we're close to that year mark. So you have those 3.5 year gaps that we see play in between those indicating points. So we are now coming to the second Passover, or at least the second mention here that we have. So look at John chapter number 5. Now, up to this point, how have the people responded to Jesus? Has it been out wholesale rejection yet? Not yet. It's not wholesale rejection at this point. You think it would be, but it has not been officially. There has been points of that, specifically one incident that we saw, John chapter number, I don't remember which John it was, but it was where he was in, he had gone back to his hometown. Remember that? And how did his own hometown people receive him? Yeah, they rejected him. They even drove him out of the city. We're going to throw him down on the ground and begin stoning him. But you remember he passed through that. And he made the statement. He says, a prophet's not accepted in his own country. And surely that was true, wasn't it? He was not accepted by his people, specifically his own people he grew up with. They did not want him. Okay? Now we come to John chapter number 5. We're going to need some readers here. We're going to go to verses 18, so 1 to verse 18. So if I get 1 to 5, Darla 6 to 10, Bill 11 to 15, or 11 to 15, David, and then 16 to 18, Wayne. Okay? Okay, stop right there for a second. Before we move on, we're not going to cover this into great detail. What's going on with this? You see that? It's the pool of Bethesda. And what is happening at this pool? And we already saw that. Where that's indicating time indicator where we're at. We're at that second. But we have a bunch of impotent folk. What are impotent folk? People that are lame, people that are handicapped, people that got problems, physical problems. And they're sitting around this pool, and what are they waiting for? That's their philosophy, okay? That's not necessarily, whenever John's writing this, he's not saying that's actually what's happening, okay? That's what they believe, and that's what he's referring to. That there's this, the waters bubble, and at a certain point when the waters bubble, we know the angel has touched it, stirred up the waters, then they step in there and they get healed. Okay? That's the viewpoint that's going on here. Whether that's happening or not, we're not really ever told that. It's just that was their belief. And so you got all these people that are there, okay? That's as far as I'm going to go with that right now, only because that's not part of the lesson. But I want you to see that because that's a question that people will ask when they read these things, okay? Next. Okay. Jews always seem to look past the amazing to see the minor, don't they? Okay. Next. Who had the next one? You had, did you have 10 to 15, or 11 to 15, sorry.
He answered them, He that made me whole, the same said unto me, Take up thy bed and walk. Then asked they him, What man is that which saith unto thee to take up thy bed and walk? And he that was healed knew not who it was, for Jesus had conveyed him away, a multitude being in that place. Afterward Jesus findeth him in the temple, and saith unto him, Behold, thou art made whole, sin no more, lest a worse thing come unto thee. The man departed and told the Jews that it was Jesus which had made him whole.
Okay. Okay. So now I've kind of given you some background. When did this take place? Well, okay, more specific than just a Sabbath day. The Feast of the Jews, which gives us a bit of indicator. We're now at the first year mark. We've already reached the first year mark here at this point. Okay. Where did this account take place? In Jerusalem first, and specifically in Jerusalem at a place called the Pool of Bethesda. Okay, the Pool of Bethesda. What's significant about the Pool of Bethesda? What did they believe about it? That it was a healing pool. That if you go there, you get healed. It was like one of those fountain of life type things. They believed in it. They believed that they could be miraculously healed. And yeah, if they were the first person that got to step into the water, according to the way this man would say it. Okay? Why did the Jewish leaders in this account get upset? Because this man is picking up his bed and carrying it on. Now, when we think about bed, don't think of a pillow top mattress. Okay? Think of a mat. Okay, a rolled out mat that this guy's been laying on. He rolls up the mat after he gets healed and starts walking with it. And Jesus told him to do that. Get this now. Jesus is deliberately telling him to do it on a day that most people would say you shouldn't do it. Okay? He is deliberately trying to, as no pun intended, to stir the waters. Okay? He is deliberately trying to make people irritated. Jesus does this, we'll see it here in our lesson. He doesn't just do it here, he does it in another place where he deliberately tries to make people irritated because he's confronting the false ideas that people have made of the Sabbath. Okay? Do we get into tradition so deep sometimes that we begin to believe it's what God wants us to do? Yeah, and that's exactly what's happened here. You got people that have made traditions around the laws of the Sabbath, and they've made the traditions more authoritative than actually what the law says about the Sabbath. And this whole idea of the fact that this guy is carrying a mat, they've completely ignored the fact that Jesus just healed the guy. Healed him. Yeah, your class will be downstairs if you want to head downstairs, and then Jennifer, come on up. Yeah, I mean, just healed the guy right there in front of everybody on the Sabbath, and all they can see is, oh, he's carrying his mat. I mean, it's just ridiculous, right? How the people can be so focused on the minor and miss the major here, and that's what's happening here. I think how Jesus said it at one point, he says they strain at a gnat out of their soup, and they swallow the camel. You know what he's saying? They miss the major, and because they're looking for the little minor thing. Okay? At one point, Jesus makes a straight-up statement. I mean, he alludes to the fact that this man is in the condition that he is in because of something he may have done. Okay? It doesn't tell us that, but he does say, when he meets the man later, he says, don't sin anymore lest something worse come upon you. I kind of get the idea that he's inferring that it's possible the reason why he was in the condition he was in was because of something he had done. Okay? I can't be dogmatic about it, but it just seems to fit that. Okay? But then they come and they find out afterwards that Jesus is the one. In fact, it tells us that this man, he sends the man away, and the man never even found out who it was that healed him, at least up to the beginning point of it. He didn't know. They're trying to figure out who told you to do this, who told you to carry the mat, who told you to do all this stuff, and we're going to go after him. And he goes, I have no idea. Some guy just said, stand up and walk, and I walked. And he said, take your mat. And I said, hey, okay, I'll take my mat. But then Jesus later comes to him and identifies himself as who he is. And then he goes, the man that's been healed tells the people, it was Jesus that healed me. So it says that they began to persecute Jesus because of the fact that he had taught a man or was telling a man to break the Sabbath. Is he breaking the Sabbath? Breaking the traditions is what he's doing. Okay, teaching the man to break the traditions. But then Jesus says something incredibly provoking. You know, he's not just stirring the waters. He wants to bring it even to just, not just a little bit. He wants to shake it up as much as he can. Look what it says he says to them. What does he say to them at this point? Well, more than that, he says, God must work and I must work. You know what he was saying? I am God. I am doing God's work because I am God. I'm doing what God told me to do. And more specifically, I am doing the work. And you say, well, is that really what they thought? Well, look what it says in verse 18. Therefore the Jews sought the more to kill him because he not only had broken the Sabbath, but said that God was his Father, making himself, what's the next word? Equal with God. He claimed himself to be God by the statement he made right there. And he's not just accidentally saying things. That's, you know, people say, well, I remember running across some people before that told me that Jesus never claimed to be God. Well, I don't know what they're talking about because this is pretty clear. And if Jesus accidentally said something that he shouldn't have said, don't you think he would try to clear it up really quick? Because, I mean, they start taking up stones and they want to stone you when you say things like that. He doesn't back off when he says those kinds of things. He continually pushes things like this in their face. He is violating the traditions, the rules of the Pharisees, and not only that, he is clearly making the point that I am Lord. I am Lord. I have the authority to do what I did. Now, to pick that idea up even further, go to Matthew chapter 12. We're going to see him do it again. Matthew chapter 12. And once again, he's going to confront the traditions. Confront the traditions. And if I just get maybe two readers here, Matthew 12, 1 to 4, and then 5 to 8. Some that haven't read yet. 1 to 4, and then 5 to 8. Who wants to do 5 to 8? 5 to 8, okay. Okay, verse 5 through 8. Wow. Okay, so first off, I want you to get the idea. Don't think of only 12 guys walking around with Jesus. It says he led his disciples into the fields to eat food on the Sabbath day. Could have been thousands of people with him. Okay? I mean, he's got that multitude following him. We already saw that, right? We saw that last week. We talked about how that he couldn't even go into the cities because there were so many multitudes of people following him. That kind of popularity was going on with him. And he happens to lead them into a cornfield. Don't think of maize, think of another type of corn. You say, what other type of corn? Well, the Bible would call it a corn of wheat, which is just a way of saying a grain of wheat. He's bringing them into probably most likely wheat fields, barley fields, and he's telling them, go ahead and eat. He knows what the rules are. He knows what the traditions are. You know what the traditions say? You can't go and work in the fields on Sabbath day. You can't go and harvest on Sabbath day. Yeah, and that's another one. And they didn't wash their hands. They went through whole religious things about how they washed. I'm not talking about that they sat under the sink for 20 seconds and rubbed their hands like the COVID people. I'm talking about what they did is they had means. That's not even a lesson, but you get me on it. They had means that they had to not let the water run back this way, but run that way so it would run off of them and not defile them. And if they didn't do it that way, they would be ceremonially unclean. And if they ate, then they would defile themselves. We already talked about that lesson at another point. But he is purposely bringing them into the field on the Sabbath day with the intent to confront the people who are going to get mad. He is stirring the waters again. Okay? Now, when they go and they say, how can you be doing this? How can you be leading these people to violate the law? How can you be doing this? Jesus gives them two examples of how rules get usurped by certain situations. There are certain situations that allow for even laws that God established to be violated when something greater is in need. Okay? This is important to note that even in the Bible, there are times where God gives laws and He gives rules and He gives commands, but they are not ironclad to the point they can't be violated for the greater need. Okay? Don't just say that you can do that with anything, but there are some things that He says that you can do that with, specifically when it comes to how the priests behave and even when it comes to things that are considered holy in God's standards, okay? And the one example that we got, the first example, has to do with David, okay? Does anybody have one of those cross-reference Bibles that tells you, because it should have two references here that tells us that what Jesus referred to. One should be in 1 Samuel. I gave you a clue. 1 Samuel, anybody find it? Have one of those? What'd you say? 21, and it's verses 1 to 6. So let's go back there and look at that real quick. Hold your place, because we're going to come back to this. 1 Samuel, all the way back in the Old Testament here, chapter number 21, and verses 1 to 6. I'll go ahead and read it for you, but just kind of everybody give me an indicator that you've made it there so we know. You can look at me or something. Raise your hand or something. Everybody there? Good. Okay. All right. 1 Samuel 21. And it says, Then came David to Nob to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, The king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, Let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee, and what I have commanded thee, and I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. Now, therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in mine hand, or what there is present. And the priest answered David and said, There is no common bread under mine hand, but there is hallowed bread, if the young men have kept themselves, at least from women. And David answered the priest and said unto him, Of a truth, women have been kept from us about these 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy, and the bread is in a manner common, yea, though it were sanctified this day in the vessel. So the priest gave him hallowed bread, for there was no bread but the showbread that was taken from before the Lord, to put hot bread in the day before it was taken. So I want you to get the implication here. David is on the run. He's been told by Jonathan his dad wants to kill him. The king, King Saul, wants to kill David. David is on the run. He runs to Nob, a place where there are some priests, and he's hungry. He's had to run so quickly, he hadn't even been able to bring food with him. He's got people with him, and he's asking, Can you give me some food? And the priest says, The only food I got here is showbread. What's showbread? It's the stuff that they would put in on the table of showbread in at this point, the tabernacle. And it would be put in there for a whole week, and then at the end of the week, they would take it off. The priests were given the privilege to eat that bread. That was theirs. It's considered holy. It was set apart for the tabernacle. Nobody else is supposed to be eating it. Priest says, I got some fresh well, not fresh, it's come out of the tabernacle, and it's sitting here. He says, I've already put on the other stuff, but, it's not for you. But the priest violates the commandment for the greater need. What's the greater need? The man's hungry. The man needs mercy. Can I say it that way? He needs mercy. And so he gives David and his men that showbread to satisfy their need. Okay? Jesus picks up and says that when it comes to Sabbath laws, we need to remember mercy is more important than just obeying to the letter and never having any bit of a yieldedness attitude. Okay? Obeying to the letter and being stone hard and cold and irresistible in any kind of way toward any kind of mercy, any kind of leniency in any way is not the spirit of that law. God did not give you that law so that you could deprive people of mercy when mercy is needed. Okay? Now we go to the other example that Jesus gives, and that one, he talks about the priest profaning the Sabbath. I want to show you this one. Go to Numbers 28. Numbers 28. Look at what he says in Numbers 28. All the way back in the Old Testament, right before Deuteronomy. Numbers chapter 28. And listen what he says to them, or what is said about the priest on the Sabbath day, what they get to do. Again, remember what Sabbath says? You're not supposed to work. You're not supposed to violate the law. You're not supposed to do any kind of work in any way. Verse number 9 of Numbers 28. Listen to what he says. He says, And on the Sabbath day, he's given instructions to the priest, 2 lambs of the first year without spot, and 2/10 deals of flour for a meat offering mingled with oil, and the drink offering thereof. This is the burnt offering of every Sabbath, beside the continual burnt offering and his drink offering. Now, you say, what does that mean? God gave them instructions to offer sacrifices, work, on the Sabbath day. And he says, and not just once in a while, every Sabbath day they do this. Every Sabbath day, as Jesus said, they're profaning it. They're profaning it. Well, there are certain commands. But what Jesus is confronting here is not just now the traditions, but the fact that the law itself is not necessarily stone-clad hard. It's not so unbendable that it removes any way in which you could show mercy. And he actually quotes something we saw last time, where he says, you need to go and know what this means. I will have mercy and not sacrifice. Anybody remember where that was from? We talked about it last week. Hosea 6:6, where God would rather that people be merciful toward people rather than be religious and ignore that mercy. Do people as Christians have a tendency to become so religious that they could forget mercy? Yeah, I think people have that tendency to become caught up in rules and regulations, and this is what we're supposed to do. And sometimes, as the Pharisees had also done, made traditions important to where they put them up as high as the law or even higher. And Jesus is basically rebuking them and saying, you have forgotten that the spirit of the law allows for mercy. And in this case, the people are hungry. And you're saying, well, we're not supposed to eat, we're not supposed to work on the Sabbath day, so you're just going to have to be hungered all day long. You're just going to have to starve all day. You can't care for them at that point. They are in trouble. There's a later point where Jesus he makes the illustration that if somebody's animal falls in a pit on the Sabbath day, would you not help them out of the pit? Help that animal out of the pit on the Sabbath day? Or are you just going to let him sit in there? Because after all, I can't work. I can't lift that thing out of there. I can't do any kind of labor. And he made the point, if you would do that to an animal, why wouldn't you say that people deserve to be treated that way? Okay? Now, one more statement that Jesus makes here that once again brings us back to the same idea that he said earlier when he was there at the pool of Bethesda. He says, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. I am the one who created Sabbath. That's what he just said. Do you think that made them mad? Yeah, they don't like the fact that he just claimed to be over the Sabbath. Okay? He is absolutely trying to stir the waters and not let them have any bit of leniency here. He hit him in the head? Yeah. Lord of the Sabbath. All right. So, what's the point? Before we get into our activity, what's the point of these two illustrations we see happening here? Jesus is God, that's one. That's maybe, I would say, a sub-point right now. Mercy toward people is more important than religious rules. Even God-ordained rules. And in fact, we're going to see later that Jesus actually will make the point that when he talks about the Sabbath, in fact, I think it's in our passage, that the passage we're just looking at here, the part where he says that Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath, that he would also say this in another parallel account, that the Sabbath was not, man was not made for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath was made for man. What he was saying there is that man is not to be subjected to the Sabbath, but the other way around. The Sabbath is subjected to the needs of man. Does that make sense? It's rest. It's a day of rest. What do men have a tendency to do? Never stop working. Energizer bunny. I mean, that's kind of a lot of what a lot of people are. Just work, work, work. And sometimes some people have to be told, stop working. And God actually ordained that at the very beginning of the world. When he worked for 6 days, made for 6 days, created for 6 days, and the seventh day he rested. And he set that to be the pattern for man, that man is to follow that pattern all through their life. And it's supposed to be a day in which man also is not distracted with work and has time to recognize God and make that day a holy day. It's for man's benefit, not for the day's benefit. Do you get that? That's the way he's dealing with this. So we need to understand the spirit of this law. Okay, there's more to it than that, but this is one part of it. All right, let me give you some worksheets here. We'll see. Just take and pass around. Hopefully we'll have enough for everybody. If not, some of you share. We're going to do what's called the Sabbath rest activity. Give you opportunity to see, look up the Sabbath more specifically and put some thoughts together about the Sabbath. Everybody got one or have access to looking at one? We got a few more. Anybody else need some? I don't need it here. I got my own copy. Okay. All right. Said by Fred. Now, if you want to be his friend. Okay. All right, so let's look at number 1 here. First off, read the little intro. It says, to understand the Pharisees' attitude toward the Sabbath as well as Jesus' response, we must look to the origin of the Sabbath day. Read the verses below and answer the questions. All right, so I'm going to need some people to help me here on these places where we're reading. Who wants to do the Genesis 2, verse 2 and 3? Okay, Bill's got that one. Exodus 31:17. Fred's got that one. Okay, let's go a little ahead here. I'll give some more assignments here. The next one is Ezekiel 20, verse 12. Who can do that one? Okay, Wayne. Deuteronomy 5:12 to 15. Darla. Okay, for number 3, we're going to stop at 3 here, and then we'll come back and see what we got for time. Exodus 28 through 11. Okay, Exodus 35, 2 and 3. Ken, Exodus 16:23 through 30. Okay, Andrea, Jeremiah 17:21 to 22. Anybody else besides the one who's already got one? Come on. Come on, courageous people. It's the Jeremiah 17:21 and 22. Someone who hasn't already got it. Come on. I'm gonna volunteer somebody here real quick. Embarrass you. All right, Jeff, I'm giving it to you. You got the embarrassment. All right. Start us off here. What is the Sabbath day based on? Bill, you have the first one. Okay, and then Exodus 31:17. Who had this? Oh, and was refreshed. Think about that, God being refreshed. Interesting. Okay, so tell me, what is the Sabbath day based on according to those 2 verses we just read, 2 parts we read? The day of rest that was established by the creation, right? God worked 6 days, 7th day he rested. That's where the Sabbath day starts. Okay? We already knew that, didn't we? Okay, the second question here is, what did the Sabbath day represent? Ezekiel 20, verse 12, Deuteronomy 5, 12 through 15. Who had the Ezekiel one? Okay, Wayne. Okay. Deuteronomy 5, 12 through 15. Okay, so there's more things said about why. First off, he mentions that it's supposed to be a sign to remember that they are reflecting upon God who sanctifies that day. He has set that day apart. From the very beginning, he has set that day apart. That's what the word sanctify means. He has set it apart as a day to remind them of the fact they need to rest and they need to recognize God in that day. Okay? But it also, as she read in that passage, has a connection somewhere else. Did you see what the connection was given? Okay, yeah, that's nice. Okay, but what did she read at the very end there that it's connected to? It's something that happened in their history, Israel's history, the Exodus. It's connected to the fact that they have been delivered from bondage, that now they are in a place of rest, no longer slaves to the Egyptians. It's to remind them of the fact they've been delivered. Okay? So Sabbath carries the idea, it takes them back to the original creation. It reminds them that God has set apart a day for them to sanctify this day. And it also reminds them of the fact they've been delivered and they need to live in that rest. Okay? So when you think about it, God has established a pattern of the Sabbath rest from the very first week. The Israelites were to follow the pattern of creation, where they were to work how many days? 6 days, rest on the seventh. And it supports the fact that, by the way, if we were to go back all the way to the beginning of our Sunday school series, that God created in how many days? 6 literal 24-hour days, not 6 periods of time. Right? I mean, if it's 6 periods of time, then your rest day is going to be a long rest day too, I would hope. Right? Thousands of years of rest, right? So, and it also reminds them that they had been delivered. All right, now number 3. It says, for each of the following verses, identify its context and what commands are concerning the Sabbath. Exodus 20, verse 8 through 11. Who had that one? Okay, so where's the context of that passage? What's Exodus 20 all about? It's what commandments? The 10 commandments. So this is one of the 10 commandments. Which one is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Which one? Come on, all you people. 4. Make sure you can count my fingers. All right. All right. It's the 4th commandment. And basically, the summary of the commandment is don't work on this day. Okay? Exodus 35, verse 2 and 3. Whoa. Okay, do you hear that? God actually sets the standard so severe at this point that if you work, you're dying. Okay. Yeah. Well, we gotta see it all though. Remember, one law doesn't necessarily establish the whole standard. We got to see it all. Okay. We got to look at it. But he says you don't even get to kindle a fire on that day. You know, I remember people saying we still have to live under the Sabbath laws. I remember hearing someone say, "Well, if you drive on a Saturday, you're kindling lots of fire." Right? I mean, your engine is a combustible engine. It's firing all the time. You are violating the Sabbath. Right? Okay. Anyways, if you're going to get real down to the spirit of that. Okay. Exodus 16, 23 through 30. This one's an interesting one. I like this one. Okay, go ahead. Okay. I'm sorry, go ahead. Sorry. Okay. Sorry to cut you there. All right. So here he gives, this is actually before the Ten Commandments. Did you notice that? Because Ten Commandments were chapter 20. This is where God is setting up the practice, even before that becomes a commandment that they are to follow by law. Here, and he sets it up as an example. I got it when, remember they're wandering around in the wilderness, and what does God give them when they're in the wilderness? Manna. What's manna? It's what is it? That's what manna means. What is it? It's what is it? Okay. And so they go down there. We're picking up some of this. What is it? But they do that for 6 days. And what does God do on the sixth day? Gives them a double portion, so they can go out and they can collect for 2 days. What does he not do on the seventh day? He gives them no manna. They get to get their double on the sixth day, and then on the seventh day, there's nothing out there that's going to be for them to eat. And if they try to go out on the seventh day, they're basically showing they did not obey the sixth day to go get double, and so forth. And what happens from the very beginning? People go out there on the seventh day, and Moses says, how long are you going to keep doing this? God has already established this law. This is what my people are supposed to do. This is how they're supposed to act. And so they were to gather all their food throughout the week, double on the sixth, and rest on the seventh day. And so the whole lesson here is that you work for your food all through the week, and you rest on the seventh. Okay? By the way, we're not going to look at it here, but there's later in the law, God actually established the fields to be that way. Do you know that? You work in the fields for 6 years. The 6th year, God doubles what you make. 7th year, you sit and rest. And you let your land lay fallow for 1 year. Boy, what a test of faith that would be, wouldn't it? And that's what God has established here, okay? So every 7th year would itself be a type of Sabbath year. Okay, Jeremiah. Who had the Jeremiah one? Oh, that was Jeff, yeah. That it? Okay. So he says, bear no burden. What does that mean? Don't carry anything like a mat. Was Jesus telling him to violate the Sabbath? Can't make it either. You have to leave it in rags. Okay, so your kids don't have trouble with that one, huh? Okay, so no work, no carrying on that day. Now, so at this point here, we see all of this being said here about the Sabbath. The Sabbath is basically comes down rest from work. Rest from work. Even kindling a fire is you are not to do. If you go to Numbers chapter 15, a man is, get this now, stoned to death for going out on the Sabbath day to collect sticks to burn wood, to kindle a fire. You think God is serious about the command at this point? Yeah, they probably waited till the day after. Okay, so now we would say that sounds ironclad, in stone, no mercy for those days, for that day. Now we go to the other side. Amos passages here. How were the people in these passages dishonoring the Sabbath? Now, this is Amos chapter 8, verse 4 through 6. Who wants to do that one? We'll have a refresh here, so who wants to do it wants to do one who's already done it before. Amos 8, 4 through 6. Isaiah 58, 13 and 14. Okay, Nehemiah 13, 16 and 19. Darla. Okay. So the question is, how were the people in these passages dishonoring the Sabbath? Let's get the Amos one, Miss Andrea. Okay, so there's a couple things going on here. Did I cut you off or did you get it all? Okay. There's a couple things going on here. One, they're doing business on the Sabbath. But it's more than that. Did you hear that? It says we're falsifying the balances. What does it mean to falsify a balance? Yeah, you know how they measured out money? It wasn't like 50 cents like we have. We recognize quarters, doesn't matter how much they weigh, they're worth 25 cents. Right? Nickels, no matter how much they weigh, no matter how much they've been scraped and all that, 5 cents, right? We understand that. How did they measure money? They measured it by weight. And so you would say, well, so much wheat, so much barley, so much whatever they've got for so much weight of the metal that you have. That's how they do it. So they'd falsify the balance. How would they falsify it? Well, they'd make it where it would have to be extra money put on there to balance it. And so, but they're not only doing merchandise or being involved in business and working on the Sabbath, but they're cheating people on the Sabbath. So they're doubly doing wrong on it. You see that? They're taking advantage. There's this deceitful plans that they have. Okay? Then we come to the Isaiah passage. Let's look at the Isaiah passage. Mm-hmm. Okay, so it says here in that verse that they're doing their pleasure on the Sabbath. What does that mean? They're doing whatever they want on the Sabbath. They're seeking their own will and basically ignoring what the law says. They're seeking their own pleasures, seeking to do their own thing. They've got their own plan set up, and they're totally disregarding what the law says about the Sabbath. Okay? And he's basically saying, if you will seek to do my pleasure on the Sabbath, I will bless you. But if you're going to seek your own, you're going to find that you're against me. Okay? So that's the second thing we see, how they're violating and dishonoring. Okay, Nehemiah. 13, verse 16 through 19. Who had that one? Okay. Okay. So at this point, it says men of Tyre are doing this. Who are men of Tyre? Non-Israelites. Okay? They're coming in and they're sitting outside the new walls of Jerusalem selling on the Sabbath day. And Nehemiah has to go after more than once, actually, if you read the passage. He has to go after them more than once to tell them to get out of here. You're not supposed to do this on this day. And the people of Israel have no regard. They're just, oh, okay, hey, that looks good. Go by. And they would actually go down the way a bit. You know, after he told them to go, they just kind of go down the road a bit. But they'd stay there and still sell on the Sabbath to the Israelites on that day. And he's not really getting after the men of Tyre, though he goes on the men of Tyre. He's getting after the people who are buying when they know they shouldn't be on that day. Okay, this shows, once again, this is what the law says. Now, up to this point, have you noticed that everything seems to be pretty ironclad? Now we get to Jesus and you go, but Jesus is doing something totally different. He's actually saying you can show mercy on that day and give allowances on that day. So that's where we get to our passage now. Go Mark 2, 27 and 28. We're almost done here. Mark 2, 27 and 28, and Matthew 12, 9 through 14, which is, I think, the place we were already at before. Okay, so if we can get to Mark 2 for Bill, and who wants to do the Matthew 12 again? I know we already read it, but let's go ahead and, actually, we're going to pick up after that, so it's a little more. So, you want to do both? You got them both ready? All right, go ahead. Mark 2, 27, 28. Okay. And then 9, Matthew 12, 9 through 14. Accuse him. That's it. That's all we had. That's all you need. You're good. You got to the point. Okay. All right. So first off, what does Jesus claim himself to be in that first part in Mark 2? Lord of the Sabbath, and that the Sabbath is made not so that man lives under it, but so that it serves man, right? He's giving the spirit of the law of what this is all about. Even though there's been these ironclad statements been made and ironclad examples being made, what do we see Jesus talking about when it comes to the Sabbath? The Sabbath was made for man, not man for Sabbath. Okay? And that if anybody has the authority to say it, the one who's the Lord of Sabbath has the authority to say it, the one who created it. Okay? Then he gives the example there we found a little bit later in Matthew chapter 12, verse 9, of healing a man with a withered hand on the Sabbath. And he did it deliberately with them intending to catch him. And he uses another example of what people would do on the Sabbath. They have no problem showing compassion and mercy to an animal on the Sabbath. If it fell into a pit on the Sabbath, they'd pull him out. They wouldn't leave him in there all day and say, sorry, can't help you. You got to sit in there and hopefully survive the day. But they would pull him out. And he says, this man on the Sabbath day needs to have that same kind of mercy shown to him. And he says, aren't men better than animals? Right? Don't tell it to PETA. So here's the point of that in the spirit of what we need to understand. God sets the pattern for men to follow by first working for 6 days, rest the seventh. Jesus says Sabbath was made for man who needs that rest. Man is so foolish that he will continually violate that and thus miss out what he needs. And so the law enforces it. Do you understand that? But the spirit of that law says man needs mercy. Man needs compassion. Okay? That's why you see Jesus willing to violate these laws, even laws that are set in Scripture for the greater need. Do you get that? And he's willing to confront people who hold to a law with heartless, being compassionless, if you will, toward people. He's willing to confront those type of people to point out that they really do not know the God of that law. Does that make sense? Or understand the spirit of that law? Okay. So let me give you 3 thoughts, and we're going to be closed. 3 thoughts. Well, maybe not 3 thoughts, but ideas of 3 things. Historically, there have been 3 different views on how Christianity is to look at the Sabbath. Christianity is to look at the Sabbath. There have been views that say that some believe that the Sabbath commands stand as taught in the Old Testament and that Christians are to obey the Sabbath in all its ways. First off, I'd say that's nearly impossible. You're not an Israelite in the full sense of it, which that would make it impossible too. That, as I said, just in a basic sense, if you start your car up on the Saturday, you have violated it, right? Travel distance. How far are you supposed to travel? I mean, there was all sorts of rules and stuff. That's probably for the most part, I would say most believers, if not all of them, maybe just a very small fraction of them, do not hold to that as something we hold on to today. Second, other believers that the spirit of the Sabbath has been transferred to Sunday. And that idea comes from the fact that Jesus rests on the Sabbath and he raises from the dead. And we see multiple examples in the book of Acts where they met upon not the Sabbath day, but the first day of the week. And that's multiple examples. Even in the book of Revelation, it tells us, it calls this day the day of the Lord, or the Lord's day, that first day. John has the vision, the Revelation vision on the Lord's day, the first day. So people have said that the spirit of the Sabbath goes to the Sunday. Okay? Then you have a third view, is that the Sabbath was fulfilled in Jesus, and believers are no longer obligated to observe the Sabbath at all. And they would reference Colossians chapter 2, verse 16 and 17, which says that the Sabbath, and it specifically refers to the Sabbath, was a shadow of things to come. A shadow of things to come. Or they would refer to Romans chapter 14, where Paul makes the argument that one day is not better than another day. Romans chapter 14, verse 5 and 6. You could look at that if you want to see that. Even in Hebrews chapter 4, which talks about the fact that there was a rest remaining for the people of God, and that this rest is not the day itself, but the salvation that God would give. Okay? I'm going to tell you where I hold to. I hold to 2 and 3. I blend them together. 2 and 3. 1, I believe that it's very clear that we meet on the first day of the week because that is the new rest day that the Lord has given for us. He's already really, in some sense, fulfilled the type of that rest day in his own resurrection from the dead, or actually his rest in the grave, finished his work, and then rested, and then rose from the dead. And we honor the first day, not because I say it's the Sabbath day, but we honor the first day because we honor the resurrection. We honor the resurrection. But I also hold to the fact that it's all fulfilled in him. That it pictures the rest of God that he gives to people. And that Jesus Christ did the work, finished the work, and now we can enter into that finished work and rest with him. In fact, if you remember, Romans chapter 6 says that we enter into his death and we enter into his resurrection, but we also enter into his burial as well. We enter into all of that. In a sense, when you get saved, it's like you get brought back to that point, and now God says, that satisfies me. When God looks at you, he looks at you and sees the death of Christ, and he says, well, it's already paid for. The work's done. You don't need any more. Okay? Free admission. Yeah, been paid for by somebody else. But I do think it's important that we don't just say, I'm going to make up the rules and do it however I want. In the sense of saying, well, we can meet any day of the week if we want. Well, we can, but there should be the pattern is found in the book of Acts that we meet on the first day. It's there. Can you say it's a direct command? I can't find it, but it's called the Lord's Day. I think I'll just go ahead with it. What do you think? Huh? All right. All right, go ahead. Yes. Yeah. Because they would be number one, at least to a part. Number one, and say that God didn't undo that part of the law, and so that law is still in effect. But it can't be fully in effect. If you go back and you look at all the laws, there's a lot of it that there's no way they're living up to that. So in a sense, they're violating it. And again, the spirit of that law is, at least in the fulfillment of it, is that it's in Christ. He is the rest. He provides the rest, and it's the salvation rest he gives. Yeah. And the first day is the day that we go and meet together in a Sabbath-like way, because it represents what we see, or it follows the pattern we see in the book of Acts, and it honors the resurrection from the dead. Any other thoughts? You're welcome. This is your opportunity to give your thoughts or questions. Rest in the Lord. It's a day to be remembering him, isn't it? Yeah. So God, in that sense, you'd say the Sabbath day is not just so you stop working, it's so that you get your mind on God. Yeah, God has actually set it in such a way that you do that. Yeah. So wouldn't a Sunday work to fit in that pattern as well? Yeah. It's a day where you get to set your mind on God. Now, you should do it every day. Honestly, I mean, the Bible talks about the fact that you are to walk in the Lord daily, not just on Sunday. But it is an official day where the group comes together and encourages one another in their faith, right? Okay? All right. Well, let's go ahead and be closed in prayer. I hope that was helpful, at least to some, and maybe some provoking of thought for all of us. All right? Let's go ahead and pray, and then we'll come back at 15 after. Thank you, Lord, for our study here of your word. Help us, Lord, to put these things into practice in our life. In Jesus' name, amen.